for them to capture a bunch of attention on the Twitter. All right. Crypto is getting absolutely hammered. It's the Chinese have once again said that they're basically saber rattling about cryptocurrency. They're obviously going to do their own
Jason,
crypto.
I think you have to talk about China in a slightly broader lens than just what's happening in crypto, because this is the same week where they forced Zhang Yiming to resign from ByteDance. I mean, last week last month it was the CEO of Pinduoduo,
and Jack Ma's MIA.
They're going for the jugular. I mean,
why are they taking out all their top CEOs? This would be like putting Elon and Jeff Bezos on the bench. Is it they just don't want any heroes?
I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe the speculative part in me would say they're showing them who's really in charge of these companies. I mean, it would be crazy, to your point, if the government of the United States forced Sundar Pichai and Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk to resign. It's like, hey, I'm sorry, you need to leave right now and put somebody else in. And
deactivate their badges.
Yeah, we just relentlessly criticize them, right? But yeah,
we just demonize them. We just try to cancel them.
But look, they deserve that level of scrutiny because of the amount of power they have. But yeah, that we don't put them in jail or house arrest or drive them out of their companies. And that is a big advantage for the U.S. economy.
The Treasury Department here in the United States is doing a little saber rattling. They want to know anytime there is a $10,000 transaction in any kind of digital token. And they're talking about a CBDC to do their own cryptocurrency. So they're putting out a white paper for feedback this summer. We are now seeing a pullback on Bitcoin from, mid 60s to, now into the 36, 37,000 per Bitcoin. Do you think this is the end of the beginning of the end?
It's the beginning of the beginning. David Rubenstein was on CNBC today, and David Rubenstein, for those of you guys don't know, was a co-founder of Carlyle Group. More blue chip and blue blooded you cannot get. And very connected in Washington. And, he said it best where he said, effectively, the people want this and the government will have no choice except to support it, because you can't take something like this with this much institutional and retail demand away. So we have to go to the place where now crypto needs to be like everything else. And maybe the crypto stands get upset with that because they don't like it that, a bunch of their parents are all of a sudden going to be buying tokens and stuff, but they got to get over it. Then this stuff should be, transacted in the same way you transact anything else. You buy it, you sell it, you get a tax return, you pay your taxes, and you move on.
This reminds me of the transition that we all went through with, I don't know if you remember Kazaa and Napster and BitTorrent. Like everybody, a lot of our contemporaries in their 30s, 10, 20 years ago were like, you can't stop it. You can't stop it. And it got stopped. Like you made it illegal and you prosecuted people. And then you came up with solutions that were regulated like Spotify or, Netflix, and you gave the consumers what they wanted. So David, do you think this is a similar path right now that we're going through, which is the crypto zealots and the stands are going to basically have to get used to, as Chamath's saying, their parents buying it and crypto not being this underground thing, but being regulated in a major way in the United States? And is that a good or bad thing?
I think the thing that's happening quietly behind the scenes is that major Wall Street players, institutions, endowments, and so forth over the past year have decided that Bitcoin and crypto is a legitimate asset class, and they've been allocating to it. Huge pools of capital, balance sheet capital have been allocating into it. I don't think that's going to change. This is probably a pretty good buying opportunity. We've seen these crashes in Bitcoin many, many times over the years. It plummets down and then it goes back up, and it eventually goes back up and reaches a new peak. So this is probably a pretty good entry point for the next rally. We don't know when that's going to be. But the whole point of Bitcoin is that it's censorship resistant. And China can do its best to try and stamp it out, but I don't think they'll be successful at that.
You don't? You're so wrong about that. That is the most naive take, worst take you've ever had.
How's China going to stop Bitcoin?
How do they stop VPNs? They put people in jail. How do they stop religion? They put people in jail.
They may make it incredibly hard for Chinese citizens to get a hold of Bitcoin. I agree with that, but they're not going to be able to stop Bitcoin.
They're not going to stop Bitcoin in the West, but they will stop it in China.
They
100% full stop. And you know how many servers are in China? Go talk to the people who were in Tiananmen Square about what happened.
The miners will have to move out. The miners will have to move out.
Miners are done. And then if it'll be an underground thing, like it'll be like having a VPN, which is 5 years in jail for selling VPNs.
What do you think about the IRS requirement that you have to report any Bitcoin transaction over $10,000? Do you think that and Americans can be prosecuted for not reporting, right? So I don't know how much. I don't know how much.
Fine.
Huh?
Good.
So what?
Do it.
So
yes. What? Get over it.
But I do think that will get rid of 20% of the transactions that might have been nefarious.
This is the Silk Road fallacy that, that the only legitimate use for crypto are.
Well, I said 20%. I didn't say only.
Okay, fine. But so maybe it makes that small fraction of illegitimate or illicit use cases.
What do you think, Friedberg?
No, Sacks, I think the point is that they're trying to chase down. It's not about illegal use cases. It's about not reporting a taxable gain on your Bitcoin before you use that money to buy something. So
of course, it's about tax evasion. But look, but that's not going to stop Bitcoin usage. Smart people who've been trading Bitcoin have been paying taxes on it for years. I don't think that's really an issue. If you were in China and you had created your wealth in China or many, many other countries all over the world, and there were currency restrictions and controls, and the government was asserting more and more power, and we're putting business leaders under house arrest and seeking to put them under their thumb, you'd be trying to convert as much of your net worth into Bitcoin as possible so that all you have to do is, if you ever had to flee the country, you wouldn't have to have dollars in your suitcase or gold bricks or diamonds. You'd simply have to have a password in your brain that you could access at any computer terminal when you got out of the country. And so I think that sort of digital gold is a phenomenal use case of Bitcoin. And the more oppressive all these countries become, the more they increase the value of that use case.
What do you think is the black swan event in crypto, in Bitcoin in particular?
Taxation in the United States. A 10% additional taxation like you do on cigarettes. That would be for me. The United States putting a tax on it that makes it less competitive with our national coming cryptocurrency. The CBDC that the United States will launch in the next 2 or 3 years. They're going to say, if you want to use any of these other currencies, there's a 10% tax on them. We want you using ours, the legitimate one.
There's a very negative black swan that obviously has never occurred. But if anyone ever manages to counterfeit a Bitcoin, or this is the double spend problem, right? If you could ever double spend or figure out a way to create Bitcoins, or counterfeit them, whatever, that weren't in the blockchain, if the number of Bitcoins ever grew beyond the 21 million, that's just built into the way that the whole thing works. If that ever happened, Bitcoin is instantly worthless. That would be the black swan on the negative side. I think the black swan on
if it didn't happen in the first 11 years, what do you think the likelihood on a percentage basis that it happens in the 20th?
Exactly.
It's too expensive now, and it's too visible. Like the way that it would have happened in the first 2 or 3 years.
Or the argument could be made the opposite, that now it's so valuable that it's worth investing to figure out
a bigger target.
Yeah. And rather than have it be about a diminishing probability, it could be an increasing probability over time, which is that the pathways to get there start to get resolved, whereas in the past you didn't have enough time to resolve those pathways. And I'm speaking highly theoretical here, but like certainly there's a lot of technical.
That doesn't take into account that it's open source and that everybody can see it. So you would think that everybody would discover the vulnerability at the same time, right? In an open source project.
Well, no, I think the issue, practically speaking, in this would be that you would see those resources getting organized, meaning you'd see silicon being bought in volume by some centralized player, and then you'd have to see water and power come together as well. And this is where I think it's just not realistic, where today that I think the horse has left the barn, because if you try to basically capture enough hash rate to kind of like overpower this network, it's like the scene in Austin Powers where he's screaming in front of a steamroller, but the steamroller is moving at like 1 foot a minute.
Right. You see it coming.
It's just like, you just see it coming.
Well, do you have a black swan, Friedberg? You asked a loaded question. So do you have one?
I think about it a lot. It's a black swan. It's because it's a black swan. So you don't really see it coming. But like, the thing about Bitcoin, which has always given me pause, is the fact that the only way it works is if everyone believes that more people are going to believe in it tomorrow than believe in it today.
Well, that's the only way it appreciates.
Yeah, but for a variety of reasons, it's also the only way that it works, because if it starts to depreciate, it becomes almost like this unwinding circumstance. And there are moments where it unwinds, but then people kind of say, well, you know what? More people are going to get on this. There's the Chinese argument. There's the Argentinian argument. There's all the reasons why people will try and store wealth in this system. And that becomes a rationale for continuing to bet on it. And my observation is so many people that are active in Bitcoin compare Bitcoin to the price of the dollar, which to me seems like it doesn't make sense relative to the intention of Bitcoin, which is to not be part of the monetary system that uses the dollar as kind of the de facto, system of value. And so why have the comparison to the dollar as the objective for Bitcoin? Why is the objective not transactions, use cases, number of people that are active on the network, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, nobody buying it is buying it as a substitute for dollars. They're buying it as a lottery ticket.
So yeah, that's right. And so then it becomes this rationale that it's like it's an investment that you put money in the form of dollars or your local currency, with the intention that you will be able to get more of your local currency out at some point in the future. And the only way that works is if you expect someone else will buy it from you at a higher price in the future. Therefore, it's all about propagating the marketing around the Bitcoin. Whereas if your objective was really about making this become a replacement currency system or replacement monetary system, you would ultimately care less about, what's the dollar value per coin, and you would care more about how many people are using it, how active.
Let me build on that question
then. It,
so Sacks or Chamath, if this CBDC and Americans' currency, starts to move towards a Bitcoin blockchain-like experience, what would America start to look like if 10 or 20% of your dollars, instead of being held in a bank, were on a blockchain with an American?
A government-backed blockchain doesn't accomplish anything.
It's still centralized.
It's centralized. And not only is it centralized, but also it's still prone to debasement, right?
Yeah.
And so, look, human beings have used everything from gold coins to seashells as money. We can make anything money that's easy to transact if we all agree on it. That's the sense in which Bitcoin is the bubble that becomes true if everyone believes in it.
That's
provided the number of Bitcoins stay at 21 million and that the technology enforces the scarcity. The problem we have with the US dollar is the government can just print as many of them as they want.
Yeah, you change the denominator problem.
And so I think there's a positive black swan as well, positive for Bitcoin, which is Stanley Druckenmiller thinks in the next 15 years, the US dollar will no longer be the world's reserve currency. Well, what's going to replace it? The positive black swan would be that Bitcoin becomes, if not a world reserve currency, an unofficial world reserve currency. Why? Because people trust it. They trust the decentralization more than they trust any government. And that would be a big flip.
Is the United States and China, are they going to let Bitcoin become the world's reserve currency?
Well, it's not a choice that they have.
You sure?
So, yeah. There's nothing they can do.
What about the law and guns and jail and tax?
I don't know what that means. There's nothing that there was nothing that they could do to stop it before. There's nothing that they can do to stop it now.
Well, you can't get the New York Times in China, and you can't practice religion there. So they have a pretty easy system. They put you in jail. They want to stop Bitcoin. They could just put you in jail.
How?
By finding out that you have Bitcoin. And
How?
Because they have 100% view into the internet there. They have
How?
Because they have routers. That's how they capture all the Uyghurs, is they know their location because they have mobile phones, and when they use Signal or any other encrypted technology, they catch them.
No, I don't think that's how it works. But
that's how they catch all the dissidents there, is they have them, and they also have Apple's entire data center is controlled by the Chinese government.
There's no ledger somewhere that says this specific wallet address equals David Sacks, and there's not going to be one anytime soon. And so you'll have these centralized wallet authorities that actually, have a lot of account information. But the reality is the sophisticated actors, use tumblers. They wash sort of like their paths in a way where it's very difficult to figure out who these people are. Now, if you use a site that doesn't have KYC, that's always going to be the case. And, people with huge amounts of Bitcoin are sophisticated enough to know how to stay anonymous if they want to. For everybody else who doesn't care, because for them it's sort of an investment asset class and a hedge, then they're not going to care either. And the point is, when enough people own it, governments aren't in a position. The track record of them just waking up one day and pulling the plug on anything is zero. That's not how people do things. You have to have like centralized policy and support. And I don't see it one way or the other. Of all the things that China and the United States will face over the next 30 or 40 years, this is like 50th on the list.
Sacks, what do you think? Any closing thoughts?
I mean, I think we've said it. So yeah. I mean, look, I think if you're going to stay in a place like the United States, you need to comply with tax law. You're absolutely going to report your Bitcoin holdings if it's required. But if the reason you're buying Bitcoin is because you're fleeing a country or you're worried about fleeing a country, you're obviously not going to report it. And that's the advantage of it, is that it's a portable money supply that, again, you can just, you don't have to carry anything with you. You just put a password in your